Dermot, welcome and thanks for agreeing to have a chat to Beer Lines today. It came to the notice of some people here at my work a couple of weeks ago that they really didn't know the difference between ales and lagers. They'd tried their little creatures pale ale or they'd tried their Foster's lager and really couldn't tell much of a difference between them. So I thought if it's as fundamental as that, I'd go to one of the world's leading brewing experts and ask the question, what is the difference between ales and lagers?
It's a very good question, David, and of course it's hardly surprising that people are confused about it, because even the breweries were confused about it back about, I suppose, 30 or 40 years ago, when Melbourne Bitter was called Melbourne Bitter Ale, and Victoria Bitter was Victoria Bitter Ale, and Forex was Forex Bitter Ale, but they were lagers. So there was certainly a degree of confusion in that, and you'll notice that ale appellation has dropped off those particular beers and they're just called bitters now. But you know, the whole thing about beer styles goes back right to the beginning of beer, you know, when beer was first enjoyed, and that was back about 5,000 years ago in, of all places, Samaria, which you know where Samaria is?
Middle East. That's about it.
It's actually Iraq. So it's
close.
It's actually ironic, isn't it, that, you know, the place where beer started is now, you know, a place where beer is banned. But that's where it all started, and of course it was a happy accident. And actually, beer sort of spread from the Middle East, you know, through Egypt and then up through the Mediterranean and further north through Germany to the UK, and of course from the UK to Australia, and to some extent from Germany to America as well. So beer is a sort of a happy accident that spread all around the world, and of course the thing about beer is it's totally natural, and it's made from, you know, 3 or 4 ingredients which are totally natural, and that was sort of recognised by the medieval people in what they called the Reinheitsgebot, which was the German purity law, and they said, okay, we'll make beer, but it must only be made out of malt, hops, water. And the other thing they didn't know, and the ancients actually called it God is good. They didn't know what the bloody hell it was, but they knew what it did was good for them. And of course, God is good was yeast. And yeast is a living organism that converts sugar from the malt into alcohol and carbon dioxide, actually. So that's the magic part about it, and that's what God is good gave to people when they drank beer. And of course, beer was a safe beverage in those days because it had no air in it. It was acidic. It had alcohol, which was a natural preservative. It was much safer than drinking water. So you can imagine all those people who were carrying little PET bottles of water around the city these days. I guess in medieval London they would have been carrying little PET bottles of beer around nowadays. And of course, that beer was ale, because the actual yeast that produced the beer, the God is good, and it really wasn't discovered yeast until Louis Pasteur, in fact, discovered it in the 1870s, I think it was, when they first had microscopes,
right.
And he was actually able to see the yeast cells under the microscope. They realised it was a living organism. Before that, it was just magic, you know. But that yeast, it only fermented at warm temperatures. And it was actually called Saccharomyces, which means sugar user in Latin, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which means bread, sugar user that makes bread. And of course, you know, as you know, when you make bread, you use relatively warm temperatures, and the same applied when they actually used the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the ale yeast, to make beer. It only worked at warm temperatures, and that was usually around about 20 Celsius up to, say, 30 Celsius. Now, around about, there was, you know, like 5,000 years to the 19th century was a long time, and then all of a sudden, like sometimes happens in the world, you know, like a supercalifragilistic moment, or whatever you call it, or a serendipitous moment is another lovely word. You got something that was discovered, and we can actually take it almost to the year. In fact, we can take it to the year that the yeast was actually discovered. And this yeast was discovered in Bohemia and Bavaria almost at the same time. So Bohemia being part of the Czech Republic now, of course, and but that's where good King Wenceslas came from. So it was all good news country even then. And they discovered a yeast that would ferment at cold temperatures. Like I'm talking about 4 to 6 to 8 degrees Celsius, you know.
Yep.
And they found that they could actually ferment the beer actually over the winter in very cold temperatures in caves, in those areas which are in Central Europe, which is obviously very cold in the wintertime. Now this is very important because you could all of a sudden make beer that was very finely flavoured, and of course the name for that beer became lager, which is German to store. And the reason for that was they were actually able to store the beer in the caves to mature the flavour over time, whereas ale was virtually consumed almost as soon as it was fermented. It was just a primary fermentation, and then it was consumed. It was good, but it was rough as guts, you know.
Yes.
And it was safe as well. But lager was a much finer flavour, and what you actually found with the lager beers that developed, and they soon became known as Pilsners after Pilsen, which is the prime place where they were brewed in the Czech Republic or in Bohemia.